Russia responds after the U.S. hit the country's two largest oil companies with big new sanctions over the war in Ukraine. Russia's foreign minister is now calling that move entirely counterproductive. And we are standing by to hear from Vladimir Putin.
They thought the campaign would be short. It was planned like a raid and announced like a fait accompli. Columns of armor rolled across borders as if momentum alone could bend a neighbor to will. But modern war is not impressed by parade ground confidence. It is a brutal audit of assumptions. And beginning in February 2022, Russia's assumptions met a battlefield that refused to cooperate. The opening days were built on speed. Armored spearheads pushed for Kyiv. Airborne detachments probed airfields, and missiles struck air defense sites. In Moscow's theory of victory, Ukraine's leadership would splinter under shock and awe. Its capital would fall in days. The West would disagree about sanctions while the Kremlin rearranged the map. But strategy that depends on your enemy behaving the way you prefer is not strategy at all. It is hope. Dangerous, seductive hope. On the ground, the physics of war reasserted themselves. Ukrainian territorial defense units, regular brigades, and ad hoc formations fused into a porous but resilient shield. Logistics convoys, those long exposed arteries that feed modern armies, found themselves ambushed on narrow roads, choked by breakdowns, and stalled by fuel shortages. As satellite images caught the infamous column north of Kyiv sitting inert, a larger pattern became visible. Russian maneuver forces had outrun their supply and their reconnaissance. The plan required speed. The terrain and the opposition denied it. Within weeks, what began as a multi-axis thrust devolved into attrition at too many points at once. By early April 2022, the entire premise of a decapitation strike on the capital had collapsed. Russian units pulled back from Kyiv, Chernihiv, and Sumy, leaving behind evidence of hurried withdrawal and minefields that would maim civilians for months. The war's first strategic pivot unfolded in real time. Moscow abandoned the short war and turned toward a longer struggle for the east and south, artillery-heavy, grinding, positional. The political symbolism was unmistakable. An assault designed to erase a neighbor's sovereignty had failed at its most dramatic aim. The Kremlin now needed a victory measured not in shock, but in kilometers. The summer saw two divergent arcs. In the south, Russia completed the seizure of a land bridge to Crimea, including the devastated prize of Mariupol. In the east, the method was familiar. Massive artillery volumes, creeping advances, towns reduced to husks. But something else was building: Ukrainian adaptation. By September 2022, after months of shaping operations, Ukraine shifted the war's momentum with a lightning counteroffensive in Kharkiv Oblast, ripping open a thinly held front and recapturing thousands of square kilometers in days. The shock to Russian command was not simply territorial, it was cognitive. A force accustomed to dictating pace had been forced to respond to it. Weeks later came the second blow. A disciplined Ukrainian campaign in the south severed Russian logistics across the Dnipro's right bank. In November, Moscow abandoned Kherson, the only regional capital it had taken, crossing to the left bank to avoid encirclement. For Kyiv, it was validation that an intelligent mix of precision strikes, sabotage, and persistent pressure could move an army without directly annihilating it. For Moscow, it was a public admission of overstretch. The Kremlin responded with mass. In late September 2022, it declared a partial mobilization, promising hundreds of thousands of new troops. Numbers matter, but so do quality, training, and leadership. Many of the mobilized would be fed into static lines. Their presence felt more in casualty lists than in maneuver effects. The announcement solved one problem: manpower on paper, while introducing many others: social unrest, uneven unit cohesion, and a logistics burden that multiplied with each new battalion. The war was now decelerating into something the Kremlin could sustain materially, but struggled to direct strategically. As 2023 opened, both armies burrowed into belts of trenches and minefields, stretching from the northeast to the southern front. Russia concentrated on Bakhmut, pouring ammunition and private military forces into a months-long urban meat grinder. Tactically, the city's fall in May mattered less than the trade it represented. Territory purchased at unsustainable cost. Strategically, Ukraine husbanded resources for a summer counteroffensive that would test Western concepts against modern Russian defenses. Layered mines, dense artillery, attack helicopters, drones, and electronic warfare. Two technological narratives now accelerated. The first belonged to air defense. Ukraine, integrating Western systems and doctrine, began to intercept missiles once advertised as unstoppable. Patriot batteries shot down Russia's Kinzhal hypersonic-class missiles over Kyiv, puncturing a myth and showing that layered, networked defense can reshape the air domain even under bombardment. This mattered far beyond morale. It preserved critical infrastructure and bought time for industry to repair and adapt. The second narrative belonged to the sea. In the Black Sea, a navy without a blue water fleet waged a campaign with ingenuity and range. Sea drones, cruise missiles, and precise strikes eroded Russia's Black Sea fleet and punished its basing in Crimea. By late 2023 and into 2024, Russian warships were shifting away from Sevastopol toward Novorossiysk and less exposed ports. Fleet headquarters and high-value vessels had been repeatedly struck. The metrics were debated. 1/3, 2/5 of the fleet degraded. But the operational reality was not. Ukrainian ingenuity had broken the opponent's sanctuary and reopened grain routes the Kremlin meant to choke. A weaker navy can still prevail if it understands the modern literal: cheap, networked, unmanned, and lethal. On land in 2023, Ukraine's counteroffensive gained slowly through Dragon's Teeth and minefields, trading steel and lives for pockets of ground. Western commentary called it disappointing. Ukrainian sappers and infantry called it reality. Modern defenses, when resourced and intelligently sited, are punishing. Russia had time to dig, and it used it. Ukraine adapted in turn, iterating small unit tactics, integrating drones as organic reconnaissance and strike, and hunting artillery with counter-battery networks. But the war's center of gravity was shifting. It would no longer be decided by a single breakthrough. It would be decided by who could learn faster at scale. Then the Russian system revealed its fracture line. In June 2023, Wagner's convoys rolled toward Moscow in a mutiny that laid bare the rifts between field commanders and the defense establishment. The march was short, the deal opaque, and the denouement brutal. 2 months later, Wagner's leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin, perished in a plane crash that Western officials assessed was likely caused by an intentional explosion. The episode removed an effective, if lawless, combat arm and signaled a return to centralized control, but it also broadcast a truth. The Kremlin could win arguments inside the palace. The front would not necessarily benefit. By early 2024, ammunition and air defense shortages bit hard in Ukraine as Western packages stalled in legislatures. Russia pressed everywhere, choosing choke points like Avdiivka, where months of pressure, vast artillery stocks, and glide bomb tactics ground down defenses. When the town finally fell in February, it was the Kremlin's most tangible gain since Bakhmut, a reminder that massed explosives and a fire-dominant doctrine can still seize rubble and map squares even against skilled defenders. But what is gained, and what is gained at what cost, are different questions. April changed the tempo. After months of delay, the United States approved a $61 billion support package, reopening ammunition pipelines, air defense resupply, and critical funds that stabilize a wartime economy. Almost in the same breath, Washington confirmed it had already provided longer-range ATACMS and would send more, allowing Ukraine to hit deep logistics, airfields, and command nodes across occupied territory, and, under policy limits, inside Russia's operational rear. Each of these choices tightened the calculus. It is hard to hold ground if your depots explode and your runways are cratered. Russia sought its own tempo shift in May 2024, launching a cross-border thrust into northern Kharkiv Oblast. The operational goals were layered: force Ukraine to divert reserves, threaten the second city with guided bombs and artillery, and produce political theater about buffer zones. The advance took villages and created a new salient. It did not produce collapse. By month's end, Ukrainian defenses had stabilized the line. The offensive showed Moscow's flexibility at the tactical level and its constraint at scale. It could still create problems. It struggled to solve the war. While artillery thundered, the air war changed shape again. By mid-2024 and into 2025, Ukraine began receiving F-16 fighters from European donors, with training pipelines maturing in Romania and elsewhere. Western planners cautioned against silver bullets. No single platform transforms a theater protected by layered air defenses. But the arrival of multi-role jets with modern sensors mattered. Even limited, they complicated Russian targeting, supported air defense through air policing, and paired with standoff munitions to pressure headquarters and ammunition hubs. In a war of marginal advantages, airframes are not just tools. They are time machines that buy another season of adaptation. Across 2024 to 2025, Ukraine expanded its long-range strike ecosystem, ATACMS, homegrown drones, Anglo-French missiles, forcing Russia to displace aircraft, disperse logistics, and trade efficiency for survivability. In Crimea, no base was safe. At sea, no transit was guaranteed. Analysis from naval institutes and think tanks converged on the same point. The Russian Black Sea Fleet's freedom of action had been degraded to the point that Ukraine, a nation without a traditional navy, could credibly threaten warships and constrain missile launch profiles. Naval doctrine has a new case study, and it does not flatter large fleets that neglect counter-USV defenses. Inside Russia, the war economy expanded, retooled, and repressed. Factories ran hotter, sanctions found holes and created black markets. Foreign partners and covert networks mitigated shortages. But every ruble spent to sustain mass fires is a ruble not spent on modernization. Every mobilization eases pressure at the front while multiplying it at home. The Kremlin preserved battlefield mass but did not fix the original ailment: brittle command culture and risk-averse generalship, which produced grinding assaults that could consume towns but seldom produce exploitation. The system can take territory. It struggles to convert tactical gains into strategic decision. Inside Ukraine, a different pressure mounted: manpower. A long war tests not just machines, but societies. Kyiv tightened mobilization rules, rotated units as best it could, and leaned into asymmetric offset: drones, precision, deception, to compensate for numerical disadvantages. Every Western vote became a battle of weeks. Every convoy that slipped across borders bought time for training cycles, repairs, and the next engineering trick at the front. War is a race, but it is also an endurance event. In 2025, both sides were still running. And yet, if you step back from the churn and count only the strategic objectives Moscow announced in 2022, neutralize Ukraine, seize its capital, shatter its statehood, split its allies? The ledger tells a different story. Ukraine is bloodied but unbroken. Its capital functions, its diplomacy is more integrated than at any time in its modern history, and its military has mastered 100 new skills at war's harshest price. The West did not split. It staggered and then rearmed. Russia controls swaths of Ukrainian territory and has seized ground in 2024 and 2025, but at an economic and human cost measured in generational debt and empty chairs. Even Kremlin-friendly analysts admit strategy has narrowed from denial of Ukraine to buffer zones and defensible lines. That is not victory. That is management. What then were the hidden mistakes? They were not all hidden. Some were shouted by history and ignored. A plan that depends on the enemy's quick political collapse is a plan built on sand. An army that confuses mass with maneuver will break on mine belts if it cannot fuse reconnaissance with fires. A state that tolerates good news only reporting will learn slowly, punish truth-tellers, and elevate loyal mediocrity. And a navy that believes bases are sanctuaries in the age of unmanned systems will wake to find harbors turned into target ranges. These are not just Russian errors. They are warnings to every general staff that thinks yesterday's patterns can be stapled to tomorrow's war. There were also Ukrainian lessons, learned the hard way. Minefields and glide bombs do not yield to courage alone. Counter-battery radars need shells to matter. In the darkest months of 2024, when air defenses thinned and ammunition rationing was the order of the day, Ukrainian brigades discovered again that heroism is not a logistics plan. And yet their adaptation, the patient turn toward precision strikes, the systematic hunt for depots, the sea denial campaign that drove ships from Sevastopol, the gradual arrival of F-16, widened the menu of choices in 2025. Choice is strategic oxygen. It is how you keep war from choosing for you. By autumn 2025, daily maps still flickered with attacks and counterattacks. Russia claimed the initiative, Ukraine claimed the future. The Institute for the Study of War summarized the Kremlin's concept as create buffer zones along the border, press multiple axes, grind with mass fires. In other words, a management plan for a war that once promised transformation. The bombardments continued, the drones buzzed through night skies, and civilians rebuilt what could be rebuilt in the hours between air raid alarms. Somewhere, staff officers on both sides updated spreadsheets, shells in, shells out, units rotated, units withdrawn, and told themselves that numbers could predict everything. They cannot. But they can hint at where assumptions are dying. In the end, Russia's plan did not fall apart in a single moment. It decayed along the fault lines of its design. It underestimated a people's will to resist and the world's capacity to supply them. It mistook terror for strategy and confused speed with control. It celebrated the seizure of towns while losing the initiative at sea and in the air above key cities. It silenced improvisers and replaced them with loyalists. And it confronted a defender that learned faster than analysts predicted in a theater where a cheap drone can erase a billion-dollar boast. There are no clean victories in a war like this, only balances of pain and time. But amid the pain, one balance refuses to settle. The balance between narrative and reality. The narrative promised a short war. Reality delivered a long one. The narrative promised unity at home. Reality produced mutinies, purges, and funerals that could not be televised. The narrative promised a recast European order. Reality has redrawn different maps of supply lines, alliances, and the reach of ordinary people fighting with extraordinary determination. When the war's final chapters are written, Historians will argue about turning points: the retreat from Kyiv, the Kharkiv counterstrike, Kherson's liberation, Avdiivka's fall, ATACMS punching deep into rear areas, the fleet slipping east to safer ports, the first F-16 taxis onto Ukrainian runways. But they will agree on the theme. Grand strategy is less about what you declare than what you can sustain. Russia declared much. It sustained less. What fell apart was not just a plan. It was the illusion that in the face of modern resistance, networked, supplied, learning, plans alone can conquer reality. Reality, as it turns out, plans back.